Hey, greetings. How's it going on this day that you have? I thought I would take some time to record a video of some of the discussion as to when we talk about OSHA and what is OSHA and how does OSHA work and all that business. Just for my overview. Now, I had to put my granddad's hard hat on, one that would never pass OSHA inspection today, but I found it to be quite an interesting hat, and I keep it up here in my hat racks. So that just kind of gives you an idea of safety and sometimes the way I see it. You know, when we talk about safety, it's oftentimes we get a different view of safety than what we and hope to get from OSHA itself. You know, what is safety? How does OSHA come about? What has OSHA done for us? And such as that. And oftentimes when I talk about OSHA, I'm surprised how many companies, people's companies will say to me, oh, the only reason why OSHA is there is because of the unions. Or the only reason why OSHA is there is to bug us. Or the only reason why OSHA is there is more government control. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons for that. Now, if any of you have an aviation background or have that idea back there, oftentimes you hear the same thing about FAA. You know, why is FAA there? Well, it's because the government wants more control. It's not to say the government wants more control, but really what we're looking at is oftentimes we call on the government to help save us from ourselves is really kind of the idea. That was how it was brought to me one time by a seasoned safety professional. And I've worked with quite a few of those. Ted Ferry is a name that you may hear about in the history books. D.A. Weaver's another one. Another person is Peterson. And there's a few other authors out there that have dealt with the issue of safety and have dealt with it from really kind of the inception when we talk about OSHA and it really starting out in 1970. Even though we had companies pushing OSHA for a long time, such as what happened in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, they really set the ball rolling as far as what is a good safety program? What does it mean to have safety? So oftentimes what you see is when you look at some safety issues saying, how did this all come about? And you have to think about it as to the reason being is at its infancy. So we see a lot of crazy safety issues. One of those crazy issues that we always talk about, and we laugh about all too often, is the split toilet seat. And why does that toilet seat look like it was? Well, OSHA was the one that determined that that's the kind of toilet seat we had to have. And we look back on safety issues and we think, how did toilet seats get into the whole OSHA arena? And so that one has never been answered, at least to where we can really understand it. But so with that, you know, we look at safety and we look at the infancy of it. And if you take a look at a lot of military installations as well, when we take a look at the Department of Army and the Department of Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and groups like that, we talk about how did OSHA get involved? And there was a day at one point when we used to say military unique, and Air Force and the Army used to stay out of the whole business of following OSHA and criteria of OSHA. And it wasn't until later on the Army started picking it up and saying, maybe OSHA is where we need to design our safety programs from. And the Air Force, they have to build their own, the AFOS standards. And the Navy picks up the safety and move it. Because here's one of the things that comes up in this whole business of safety. And the reason why I'm bringing it up here is part of this whole program, because we see it in the military and we see a little bit of OSHA and we don't really understand it. And we see a little difference in the civilian world. And really what it is you're seeing more and more OSHA becoming involved in a lot of the military operations. And even on the FAA side, on the land side. When we talk about land side, there's that delineation at the airports. The air side, that's where once the aircraft is ready for takeoff, that's the air side. Anything else is land side, whether it's a terminal or the hangars, any of the work there. So you have to be familiar with what that is. And so as we saw this change with OSHA coming in and starting to get into it. A lot of concerns about it, a lot of issues. A lot of people try to stay away from it. And when I posted the question regarding where do we see OSHA in our work today, especially in a military base, where do you see it? We saw OSHA really starting to get involved when they looked at what we used to call military unique operations and saw that civilians could do that work just as well. And it really became evident in the missile fields when we brought in contractors to do the work the military used to do, or very specific government employees. And now even with the areas, and it's been discussed where it is right now, even in military operations, because you have companies like DynCorp and what was formerly known as Blackwater, civilians doing military type operations. So you even see a change in how safety works in that area as well. So with that said, we really need to have a good understanding of how OSHA affects us. Where does OSHA come into this? Where do we see OSHA? And of course, I've brought up the page that you have seen for the first week. And you should have your discussions already complete for that. Give you a little bit more time to work on that. That's fine, because you really need to understand this whole area of OSHA. And so with that, I also wanted to bring in a few other sites just so that you're familiar with it, because we look at it strictly from a federal operation. But in so many cases where we see OSHA is we see it in some other areas. One of the first places I became familiar with state OSHA, and if you live in a state where OSHA, excuse me, where OSHA is run by the state, you'll find that they follow the OSHA rules, but there's a lot of state involvement, and usually it's more restrictive. One of the first places that I became familiar with and that is Minnesota. Minnesota has a very strong state OSHA program. And so you can go to the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, and there's a lot of information regarding what's there, the apprenticeships. See the list here as far as different things that you're required to do under labor and industry. In any state that you live in, you need to check on that. But then right next to this is you'll find the OSHA, the compliance, inspections, the programs, the resources, the standards, statistics, and everything else. If you're looking at ways to really affect that, you need to know what the state requires. Now, I worked for a government contractor in Colorado Springs, and part of that, we had a lot of sites out in California, and it was important for me to understand what was happening out in California, because California is a little different. They got Title VIII, and so that's a little bit different from what we saw in OSHA. And so I had to be familiar with this. I got familiar with the folks out at UC Berkeley, because there's a couple of guys out there that were very familiar with the subject of OSHA. And so we have Cal OSHA, and if you take a look here, and this is just under the criteria of that, just some of the different things, the products that you can find, some of the issues that's there. So you can go to this site. It's the Cal OSHA. It's under the dir.ca.gov, and it's /DOSH, Department of Industrial Relations, and that's where you'll find all this information here. A lot of good tools here. If you're looking for ideas, or you're looking for safety briefings and such, don't hesitate to go to some of these other sites. And I'm going to bring up one near the end of the class that comes out of Wyoming. Very detailed program where you can set it up and go with it. Don't be like the guy that I had worked with in the Air Force. He got out and got a civilian job, and then took the Air Force safety standards and just kind of whited out anything that said Air Force in it, applied the whole checklist to a company. They couldn't understand what WRM was or some other products, and how to go in and kind of clean that baby up a little later. But you have tools here that you can go through: educational outreach, educational materials, if you're looking for how to manage some of your safety issues wherever you are, or even as you're looking at this research paper that you're doing, what are some of the sources, as maybe a topic as to how does state OSHA run differently than federal OSHA, or what are some of the criteria. And so here's another one. This is the Oregon OSHA program. I would recommend that you take a look at this one. This one's got some great educational materials, some good tools. It's a good place to go for some resources. I used it quite a bit when in consulting, going in and looking at these and developing them out, benchmarking them for use in different companies. I go in and do some training or maybe even consulting. So it's a very good place to go for information. Another one is New Mexico. If you're working in New Mexico, you'll find this site. A good friend of mine, a former employee of mine at Trinidad State Junior College, when running the occupational safety and health program there, teaching the courses. He worked for me, and then he ended up getting a position at New Mexico in the OSHA department, and runs a lot of the products out of there. And this is where you're going to find, if you have a lot of Spanish-speaking employees working for you, this is a good place to go find some of that information as well. There's a lot of information. Oregon as well has a lot of good information there, multilingual work if you need to work with folks, and just depending on what kind of work there is. Now, the reason why I want to just kind of bring all this up when we talk about OSHA, has it been good for us? It has been good for us because it's brought us a lot of information, a lot of ideas to really help correct safety problems that we have, and really kind of put the onus back onto the company. Now, there's one thing I do want you to remember, though, and this is always one that I have fought for years and years, and that is when you talk about OSHA and you talk about safety training, a lot of companies, it's really quite interesting when you take a look at a company and they'll say that, no, we don't have to worry about this OSHA business, or they really struggle with it, and then somebody gets hurt and it always comes back to the company. If you take a look at the OSHA, the criteria, Section 5, it tells you that not only does the employer have responsibilities, but the employee does as well. And that's the reason why you'll find policies in companies very, very strict and very detailed. I know of a company that's zero tolerance to safety issues, and it's specific, and it lets you know exactly where it is, and there's no messing around with it or saying, oops, I forgot, because the safety training's there, the posters are there, and they really put the onus back on the employee because the safety is so tight and so developed out. And so you'll find those as well in various areas. Anyway, just kind of recap. When we take a look at OSHA, we really want to find out why OSHA came about. And how do we sell OSHA? And that's really what we have to do. In so many cases, we have to sell OSHA. How do we sell OSHA to the people around us? How do we get them to understand how OSHA affects us? And really the key thing is, when I talk to people and they tell me the reason why they don't like wearing seat belts, the reason why they don't like hearing protection, or why they don't like different things to protect themselves, I always ask them, would your mother sign off on it? Would your mother sign off a certificate here that says that she's okay with changing your diaper, or seeing things for you, or feeding you, or are your kids fine with not having a parent? And it's interesting how it kind of ticks people off and gets mad at you, but it gets them to thinking as well. Anyway, good discussions going on. Really get involved in the discussions, okay? Anyway, I'm going to close this out, and I want you guys to have a safe day.